Right. I guess we're live now. Hi everyone. Welcome to today's episode. My name's Ben. I am with my brother Toe today, and we're going to talk a little bit of college hoops and give a little bit of a preview for March Madness and the tournament, and kind of go game by game and region by region and kind of see what our insights are. And yeah, we'll kind of go from there. Cool. Thanks for hopping on here, Toe.
Yeah, very excited. I know this is a year and a time of year that both you and myself really look very fondly on, just from finding the intricacies of each matchup, and then also just talking more broadly about the tournament at large. I think this year is going to be really exciting, and I think when I think of March Madness and all the great memories that flooded, it really makes me appreciate how fun this tournament is. So I'm excited to dive down with each game with you and see if we can crown a victor here and make some money with some brackets.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think it's honestly a great year. Yeah, I was talking with a lot of other people about the tournament, and I think what makes this year a little bit different is that there's no outstanding teams this year. There's not a lot of teams that I see like really separating themselves from the pack. So, yeah, it makes it very difficult to kind of decide who you think is the best team to kind of go forward in different rounds and throughout the region and to the Final Four. So, yeah, I think to start off, what are kind of some of the general, overall themes and some teams, or what are some of the overall or overarching schematic of the tournament and some of the teams that you see?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because with like some good. I think I'm really looking forward to some of like these 8-9 matchups, because I think you have a lot of teams that are really talented that can make some noise in the round of 32. And I think also when looking at some of the seeding with like the 12 and 13, even like the 6, like I'm more intrigued by some of the 5-12, 4-13, which on paper should be worse games than some of like the 6-11, 7-10 games. So I think you're going to see a lot of upsets, in that round of 32, and even potentially in that Sweet 16. I think, Alabama, for example, I think has a pretty layup of a region, if I had to say it frankly. But I think when you look at, Purdue and Kansas, even, I think you get into some tough sledding and some really tough matchups too. So we'll see. It's going to be great, but I think overall we're going to see a lot of sleeper teams make some noise. So hopefully we can kind of parse through what those sleeper teams look like and some of those intriguing matchups as well.
Yeah, I guess we can kind of start off there with the number 1 overall seed in Alabama, and we can kind of go from there and start with their region and kind of the general insight that we have with them. And I guess starting with Alabama, do you see them going to the Final Four? I guess you mentioned that you think they have a pretty easy path. Like what are the general teams that you think will give them trouble, or do you think they'll kind of just blaze through their path? Yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, Maryland or West Virginia. I mean, from being both Big Ten guys, and I know TCU obviously in the Big 12 too. We're pretty familiar with both Maryland and West Virginia, and those teams are as inconsistent as you get. Not a whole lot of steady shot making, solid defensively, not overly athletic. I know West Virginia has always been the mold of a team that gets after you defensively, and that's what this team relies on. But with that, you're going against an Alabama team potentially who's going to really run up the floor and make you score a lot of points. So I see Alabama kind of coasting to the Sweet 16. And in my bracket, I've got San Diego State there, which I think is going to be their first real test. San Diego State is a team that it's a little more disciplined than West Virginia and Maryland. I think they're going to end up running into the same issues, and that you're going to need to score points against this Alabama team. And I just don't think San Diego State, even if San Diego State does not make it, I know we'll probably can talk about it more, like that Charleston team going to give them a lot of issues in round 1 and round 2 with either Furman or Virginia. I think all those teams can honestly make it to the Sweet 16. I think none of those teams have a chance against Alabama.
Yeah, because I think the main point against Alabama that you brought up is you're going to have to score a lot of points to beat them. And just watching, because I was, for the audience, I was in the SEC tournament in Nashville watching them play, and I was really impressed with them. And I think easily they were the most, and they showed that in the SEC tournament, that they were the best team in the conference. But yeah, they're a really good team that offensively they penetrate well, they shoot a lot of layups, and they get a lot of open threes. So a grounded defensive team in San Diego State and Virginia, I think actually have a decent enough chance against Alabama, because when you have those slow-paced teams, typically you play at their pace. You don't play at a fast pace. So I'm curious to see which of those four teams, Charleston, Furman, if they can beat Virginia, or San Diego State, which one of those teams makes the Sweet 16 there? Because I know you mentioned, and I'm in agreement with you there, that I think
Yeah, give me your
teams
thoughts on those.
realistically.
Give me your thoughts on those two games. You want to just break them down a little deeper?
Yeah, I haven't done too much research on Charleston or Furman, to be completely honest, but I know Charleston's a 30-win team, and anytime you get 30 wins in a season is it's pretty stellar and pretty outstanding. So I think that's obviously something to keep in mind. But as I mentioned, San Diego State and Virginia are, I think, very similar teams in the sense that they're pretty experienced and they come from coaching backgrounds with very good defensive schemes and philosophies. So realistically, I think one of those two teams is going to make it to the Sweet 16. And I wouldn't be surprised if both of those teams get upset. And I would expect one of those matchups to have Charleston or Furman making it to 32. But yeah, curious what your thoughts are too.
Yeah, I watched some of the game film from when Charleston beat Virginia Tech earlier in the year. And Charleston, similar to Furman, honestly, they both have very similar styles of play, are just pass a lot offensively. They both don't have like a dominant scorer per se. They have a lot of guys in double figures. They shoot a lot of efficient shots. What I think against, Furman against Virginia relies more on the three ball, which is why I've actually picked Furman to beat Virginia. Furman's defense is not very good, but I think they get a pretty favorable matchup in a Virginia team that one of their forwards, Ben Vanderplas, who's like a 10-point a game scorer for them, which means he's essentially like a 15, 20-point scorer at any other normal team. He's out for the season. And I think, there's plenty of examples of teams with guys out this year and for the tournament, Tennessee and Houston, but they're kind of some of the parts that I think can make up for it. When I look at this Virginia team, you miss a lot of shooting there and you miss a lot of efficiency. And I think you run into a Furman team that's going to shoot a lot of threes and going to give them a lot of problems, I think, on both sides of the ball. So I think Furman's going to knock them off. The reason I have San Diego State over Charleston is I think what I noticed in that Charleston Bot Tech game is Charleston struggles with athleticism. San Diego State kind of epitomizes that grinded out, disciplined in your face defense. And I think Charleston's going to have a hard time scoring in that game. And then I think ultimately Furman runs into the same issues that Charleston will face. And I think San Diego State's there to the Sweet 16.
Do you think there's any chance that San Diego State beats Alabama?
I think there definitely is. I think, to your point, San Diego State poses a lot of issues for them. After watching a lot of the Mountain West tournament, San Diego State really does struggle to score the ball. They're missing, a Kawhi or a Malachi Flynn, just a guy who can really get a bucket for them. They've got a guy like Matt Mitchell. Yeah, I want to throw out Matt Mitchell because he is one of the few guys who can really create their own shot, but I don't see the consistency there, and I don't see the shot making to compete with Alabama.
Cool. Yeah, I'm kind of in agreement there. So I guess let's go a little bit further down the region there. In the next quartet of teams, you have Creighton, NC State, Baylor, UCSB. I'm not really a fan of NC State. I don't think they play a good brand of basketball. Now you have Joyner and Terquavian Smith. They're both very good scorers and good at the guard position, but I think they're undersized, don't have the best shot selection. And a team like Creighton that's pretty battle tested in the Big East, I would be extremely surprised to see NC State go beyond Creighton and go beyond the 64, to be honest. So I'm pretty firm on Creighton to win that game. And then I have flirted with the Gauchos in Santa Barbara a little bit. Interesting team. They have a guy, I think his name's Raekwon Battle, that was player of the year. And then they also have the defensive player of the year at the guard position, who I think leads either the country or the conference in steals. And then oddly enough, they have a couple foreign bigs, I think from Great Britain, oddly enough. So interesting international flair on that squad. But I think that Baylor team, good guards with Flagler, Keontae George, obviously. They're good shot makers. But what do you think it's going to take to beat a team like Baylor?
It's interesting. I think Baylor is a team that on paper looks really, really good. You look at the roster, and they do have the mold of a team that can make a run deep in March. They get after you. They obviously won in 2020. They still have Flagler was on that championship team. Flo Thamba was on that champion team. Jonathan Ochachua, just botched his last name, but he was also on that. So there's a lot of championship pedigree on the team. But when you look at their whole resume outside, they had a good start to the year and they really crumbled in Big 12 play. So this gives me the look of a team that is almost just anxious to get out of Big 12 play where they can redefine their season. But at the same time, they've never really been able to gel, I think, from the guard position. One of the great characteristics of that championship team was Jared Butler and Davion Mitchell did a great job of kind of hamming and egging. And it was more like you two, my turn. Like they really gelled and passed well off of each other. I think Flagler and Keontae George are not as good as passers as both of those. And I think offensively, like that limits their ceiling. And just want something quick on Creighton. So you said they were battle tested in the Big East. If you actually look at their preseason or their pre-conference schedule, they had a run where they went versus a ranked at the time Texas Tech team win, versus Arkansas win. Then they went Arizona, lost by 2, at Texas, lost by 5, lost to Nebraska, lost at BYU by 3, lost at Arizona State by 2, lost at Marquette. I mean, there are few teams in the country who could say in that 8-game stretch, are battle tested, and they played a lot of different types of teams. And they, in their close losses, I know they lost 6 of those games, but there's a lot of different types of teams that they played there. And I think that's going to bode very well for them. And that's why I actually have them in the Elite 8. Is NC State and Baylor, in my eyes, are very similar type teams. If they can get through NC State, I think that gives them a good blueprint of how to take down Baylor. And then similarly, it gives them a good rematch with Arizona, who they lost to by 2 earlier this year. I could see them getting their revenge in that 6-2 matchup. So I think Creighton's actually going to advance to the Elite 8 here.
Yeah. I guess on that note, I guess we can go a little bit further on maybe to the next region, because I know I have Arizona kind of going to the Sweet 16. Wanted to give a shout out to Missouri. I think was pretty impressive that I hadn't watched a lot of hoops of this season, but was impressed really with Kobe Brown in person. Could really give it to you any way you want offensively. Kind of a matchup nightmare, about like 6'7", 6'8", 250. Shoots the long ball well, and they get after you defensively. Dennis Gates has done a great job. Was impressed with Demoy Hodge too, who's about 6'3", 6'4" at the guard position, and great defensively, and put down a couple of pretty good dunks and a lot of big shots this weekend from Hodge. So yeah, Missouri's I think pretty good, but I don't see them having enough firepower to get past Arizona.
Yeah, and one quick thing on Arizona, just to round out the region, is I think when I look at last year's team led by Ben Mathurin and Koloko as well, now they're returning Tubelis and Amar Ballo off that team, but I do think this team is lacking some of that firepower that came with Mathurin, and from both the defensive and offensive sides of the ball. Now Tubelis I think he was a second team All-American. So they're just as good, if not better, in the front court, but I think they are missing, and they also, I forget,
Dalen Terry.
Got drafted by the Bulls.
Yeah, Dalen Terry.
When I look at that backcourt compared to Kirk Kriisa and Courtney Ramey, and then I just don't see the firepower really.
Yeah, I think it's a significant step down from last season. So
I think you're right. Last year that they struggled, they barely beat TCU, and then they end up losing to a good Houston team, obviously. But I just don't see them making a sustainable run here in the tournament.
Yeah. Well, let's continue on a little bit further down the bracket. We'll go to Purdue's region. Interesting first quartet of teams there with Purdue, Memphis, FAU. I know I've been voicing it to you off air that I'm a big fan of Memphis, and obviously FAU's had an outstanding season, kind of a similar vein to Charleston, 30-win season and won the conference tournament. Do you think? Obviously, Purdue has had a really successful season in the Big 10. Edey, the guard position is pretty good, but when you match up with a team possibly like Memphis in the second round, where you have Kendrick Davis and Lomax, really good guards and quick, both with quick hands, good feet as well. Guards like that are really going to give guards on Purdue, or on a team like Purdue, I think they can give them a lot of fits defensively and rack up a lot of steals, which is what we've seen out of Memphis. But curious if you have any thoughts on that potential matchup.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to first of all, I think Memphis, when you actually look at the resume, is one of the most underseeded teams in this tournament. It's kind of like a slept-on thing because they play in the American, where it's obviously not the toughest of conferences. They beat Houston. They barely lost to Alabama on the road. They beat A&M. They've beaten Auburn. And those are two tournament teams as well, both seeded higher than them. Excuse me, Auburn's a 7, Auburn's a 9, A&M's a 7. But so I think that's a team who thinks they have a lot to prove, and their guards are outstanding. They clearly have a very tough matchup in FAU, and I know you mentioned how you liked FAU. I think the biggest issue is it's like Florida guards versus Memphis guards. Is really what it comes down to. They both play a very similar style of basketball. FAU, they've got a big 7-footer, and then other than that, it's a pretty guard-heavy team. I don't think they have anybody above 6'4" outside of that guy. And Memphis honestly plays very similar. I just think they have a little more versatility. I think their guards are a little bit better. I think that carries them in that first round matchup. Second round matchup, it's a matchup nightmare for Purdue. You've got an athletic bigs who can handle Edey, who were on the team last year, who did a great job against Chet and Timmy. So like if they're good enough to battle those two guys, I think they're good enough to battle Edey. Memphis's guards are going to give Purdue's guards an absolute nightmare. They haven't faced the athleticism. They haven't faced 40 minutes of pressure and ball denial that Memphis is going to present. So I think Memphis is going to actually win that game. What are your thoughts, either on that or kind of looking farther down on the region?
Yeah, I think what I like looking at some of these matchups are teams that may not have done well last year in the tournament, but have made it again this year. So Memphis is one of those teams, obviously really strong team. You had part of the reason that they did so well against Gonzaga last year in a very similar position against Timmy Holmgren. They had Jalen Duren that really kind of was an anchor down low, and they don't have that this year, but I have been extremely impressed with Memphis. And I think what you mentioned, they kind of present at the guard position a different kind of pressure. You mentioned the ball denial and some of a lot of tip passes and tip balls that you don't necessarily take into consideration, because I don't think it's a very different style of what you would see in the Big Ten versus some of the AAC. I think they play a little bit quicker, kind of hand foul you a little bit more. But I think that Memphis has a real shot at beating Purdue. But you want to go a little bit further down into another interesting set of games with Duke, Oral Roberts, and Lafayette in Tennessee.
So it's really interesting. So, Duke, and I think regionally so, because they looked great in the ACC tournament, has really gotten a lot of national buzz of a dark horse team. I don't think you can really put Duke and dark horse ever in the same sentence. But I think, Vegas has this game at, I think, a 6.5 point spread. Oral Roberts obviously is a team who's been there. But I thought it was interesting that I think it seems like the books are kind of fading Duke a little bit. And I think that's important to note. I think they're going to squeak by Oral Roberts. I'm usually kind of bearish on teams who have just recently made a run and then they are coming back in a more favorable seed, obviously more familiar. I just think like part of Oral Roberts has that 7'4" kid from Arkansas, Vanover. Like he just is such a different beast for any of those teams that, in their conference, whereas Duke with Lively and with Filipowski are just going to be pretty, be able to stifle it far more than another 5 seeds would be able to. A. Smith, I think, is going to give them everything they handle. I just think Duke right now is a little too battle tested, and I think knows the matchup in front of them. And I think Shire's done honestly a really good job, and I think they're going to be ready to go for that game. Tennessee, Louisiana, I've kind of gone back and forth on who to pick here. I think Tennessee is really going to struggle to score the ball without Ziegler, especially in this tournament setting. Louisiana's got some good backcourt depth and also front court depth. Going to be pretty athletic as well. I have Tennessee winning just because I do like this team. And I think Louisiana's just, they kind of pride themselves on getting to the rim. And that's exactly what Tennessee's defense is made to combat. And I think it's going to be a little too much for Louisiana to overcome that. That being said, I think that's where Tennessee's luck stops. And I think Duke is just going to kind of eat them up. And I don't think Tennessee's going to score enough points to get in that game. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm kind of thinking of the same thing. I think you had a pretty good monologue on Duke. I think they're one of the hottest teams in the country. Filipowski is in my opinion, been one of the best freshmen, and maybe not even the most heralded, I would say, especially at the forward position. But yeah, I think they're really putting it together and they're peaking at a good time. The issue, I remember watching Tennessee this weekend, and you mentioned it, that they really have trouble scoring the ball. And with Ziegler out of the game offensively, they don't necessarily have a point guard at the moment, so they're gonna go with Muscovy and Tyreek Key, who I think is also one of the primary ball handlers now. But yeah, Tennessee really struggles offensively to put the ball in the hole, but defensively, I do think they are extremely well coached, and they have the length and athleticism to compete. But I do see Duke kind of going beyond round of 32 and Sweet 16 and possibly beyond. Yeah, let's go a little bit further down the ranks there. Let's start with Marquette and Vermont and Michigan State and USC. In my opinion, I think Marquette's probably playing about as good as basketball as anyone in the country. Been really impressed with Tyler Kolek, and I think he was kind of snubbed from some of the higher All-American teams. He got his justice on the third team, as they have just released those teams today. But yeah, it's an interesting Marquette team in my opinion, because you don't really have a traditional big. You have, or I believe they bring a big off the bench, but they start about 2 6'8", 6'9" guys. I think it's Ogadoro and then Olivier. I can't remember his name, but they're both pretty skilled, and I think compliment to Cam Jones and Kolek, who really runs the show well, and one of the best passers I think I've seen in recent years. And defensively, I think they're really, really, I've been really impressed with some of the rotational work that they do. I think Shaka's having to play extremely well on both ends of the court. So yeah, how far do you think Marquette's going to go? Do you think they're going to have any trouble with Vermont, or maybe some of the link with USC, or a potential March matchup with Michigan State that always does give a little bit of trouble?
Yeah, to be honest, I think this Marquette team is one of the most slept on teams in the country, which is hard to say from a 2 seed. But when you go 17-3 in that loaded Big East, you win the tournament as well. The way that they did too, they spanked Xavier, I believe, in the championship. They've got all the makings of a team that can really make a serious run come March. You know, they're tall. They've got a ton of shooters around Kolek, which is kind of a cheat code for a guy who gets paint touches as quickly as he does. And he does a great job of spreading the ball around. Like, I really think Marquette's a Final Four team here, and I think they do have a favorable draw. Michigan State, I think actually is going to have a really tough time with USC. USC's long, and I think going to give their guards bigger trouble than they've used to in the Big Ten. And so I think Marquette can go pretty far. I'm curious what your thoughts are on this Kentucky-Kansas State matchup.
Yeah, I've watched enough Big 12 hoops, and I'm not a huge fan of Kansas State. I know they really do have pretty good firepower with Keontae Johnson, Marquise Knoll really having a good season, as they made the All-American third team. Desi Sills has really provided a good boost for them. That's kind of a glue guy. I'm not confident enough to see Kansas State going far in the tournament. TCU just ran them out in the conference tournament, and it was the second time that they really blew them out this season. I don't know. I'm not really impressed with any of those teams in that quartet. I do think Kentucky's kind of putting it together a little bit, but in terms of previous seasons, I think they're pretty average. But yeah, I do see Kentucky and Kansas State moving on. Haven't really decided who I think is going to be the winner of that game, but I do believe I think Marquette can get past them on that bottom portion of the East region, though.
Yeah, I agree. Why don't we move across the board there to the West region? I think this is, in my eyes, the most exciting region. I think you've got, there's 6 top 20 KenPom teams just in this region, not even including Arkansas and TCU, which is pretty crazy. Give me your thoughts on, some things to look for and some of these games, even just the round of 64 games that you like here.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of mentioned it. This region is pretty loaded, and it's kind of a gauntlet. If I had to bet, I would say Kansas is probably going to be one of the first number 1 seeds to fall. I think they're going to have a really difficult matchup, whether it's Arkansas, whether it's Illinois. Yeah, and I think when you have a team like Illinois and Arkansas, whoever it is, defensively, I think they both get after it, and they both have good shooters and good scores on both teams. So in my opinion, I think Kansas is really going to struggle with either one of those teams in the second round. But yeah, I think on that top portion, it's really going to be a gauntlet to see like who makes it out of those 8 teams. Because obviously, in St. Mary's, VCU, I'm really strong on UConn. I think they are probably one of the most balanced teams in the entire country. Haven't necessarily performed, but I think they are getting into a groove right now. A fan of Jordan Hawkins. Yeah, I think they have an interesting combination of really rugged, anchored bigs down low, and then they also have pretty good scorers. But yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I echo a lot of your thoughts on this Kansas team. I think, traditionally you always think of Kansas, and they've got a big power forward, throwing it to a McCormick or Udoka Azubuike, or, they've Perry else. Like they really embody that like in and out style of basketball. When you watch them play now, they'll put Jalen Wilson at the 5 a lot of the times. They'll put Dick at the 4 or the 5. They play a lot of small ball, which I think because they have just such talented guards, they play, Bill Self has done a great job with that team this year. I just think when you play a team like Arkansas that has as much size as they do, and Illinois who has many wings as they do, it's a pretty good antidote for playing a guard heavy style of offense. So I have Kansas, similarly losing to either the winner of Arkansas or Illinois. I'm looking at some of these 4-5-6-3 matchups. I think St. Mary's got a horrible draw with VCU. St. Mary's is very technically sound, fundamentally sound, brand of basketball. They shoot it really well. I just watched VCU at the Barclays Center this past weekend, and they are deep. They shoot really well, and they've got a ton of athletes. And I think that's going to pose a lot of problems for St. Mary's. I think they're really going to struggle to score the basketball. A lot of people are kind of leaning into that UConn Iona storyline with Pitino. Well, I think there's something there. I think Pitino's kind of halfway out the door, honestly, to St. John's, if I had to guess. So I think UConn's going to take care of business there. I also like TCU and Gonzaga to move forward as well. What I'm really looking forward, I think TCU Gonzaga could be one of the best games of the tournament. Gonzaga is incredibly, I think they're top 5 in offensive efficiency this year. They're not, this is actually ironically one of the first years Gonzaga's actually played an incredibly tough non-conference schedule, and they did it pretty well. They had a lot of good wins and some tough losses. So I think they are a little slept on. I just think when you look at their draw of TCU, UCLA, and then potentially Kansas or Arkansas or UConn, there's just a lot of tough teams to play in a row. So I actually think TCU has a pretty decent chance of knocking them off. I think that the loss of Eddie Lampkin is going to be tough against Timmy, which even sets up for, that 2021 rematch against UCLA, which again, tough matchup for them. I think they're going to lose to either one of those teams, but there's a lot of good teams where those Sweet 16 matchups are going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'm in full agreement there. And in my opinion, in my bracket, I think the winner of the TCU Gonzaga game is going to go to the Elite 8 with that upper portion of the region. Yeah, I think UCLA with the loss of one of their starters, I don't know if they have enough firepower. And traditionally, and this year, they've been extremely good defensively, and a lot of good defenses in this region. I think Gonzaga, TCU is going to be a really interesting matchup. I've watched enough TCU hoops this year, and obviously they got Mike Miles at the helm. Damian Ball is playing extremely well, and they lead the country in fast break points, and they really turn you over defensively. So I think the winner of that game is going to have a real shot at a Final Four opportunity. But
all right, let's finish it off with the Midwest, and then we can look at the Elite 8 Final Four national champion conversation. To me, real quick on the Midwest, I think this is one of the most boring regions. I think this is the most boring region.
Yeah.
I think you've got a lot of mediocre teams within that kind of like 3 to 8 range. Just real quick, both Iowa and Auburn are going to get killed by Houston. They just are. Like, Iowa is notoriously known as as a Big Ten fan, they're one of the worst defensive teams, and they always come out tournament time, you'll see how bad they are. This team's not even as good offensively as they are traditionally. And Auburn's not very good offensively. And I think an angry Houston team with the return of Sasser is going to do some damage. And then looking at like Miami and Drake, I actually think Drake is really poised to win this game. Miami, obviously they made a run last year. It was a little fluky, but they made it to the Elite 8. They have really good guards in Isaiah Wong, who I believe was first team all ACC, but you have a Drake team who is very, this reminds me of the Iowa Richmond game from last year. where you've got a team like Miami who made it to the conference championship, who's got a lot of good guards who can score the ball. But you've got a Dre team that's really experienced, who's going to not limit second chances, and going to guard them very, very tough. They've got a matchup nightmare in the coach's son there, who I think is really good. And then in that Indiana game, I think Indiana is one of the most overrated teams in the country. They've got two pros in Hood Schifino and Trace Jackson Davis, but outside of that, they got Swiss cheese.
Yeah, the coverage there on that Indiana team. And just watching Kent State, they're probably one of the best mid-major teams that I've witnessed this entire season. Point guard Sincere Carey, he's a gamer, he's a dog. He kind of leads them at the guard position, and then just all around they're pretty athletic and they get after it defensively. And I think they have a formula to beat Indiana and possibly go a little bit further. But what's interesting is you look at that region and you go a little bit further down. I think Xavier's a team that really hasn't gotten a lot of national praise, to be completely honest. Sully Boom is someone that really, in my opinion, should get a little bit more praise at the guard position. And big fan of Colby Jones. Nunji at the big position is pretty solid for them. And they have a really all-around roster that I think has been battle tested in the Big East, as I mentioned with Creighton. But I think on that bottom half portion of the region, there's a lot of teams that can really advance and could potentially make a run. You got Penn State, who I think is extremely good when you got the three-headed snake of Pickett, Seth Lundy, and then Andrew Funk. And then you also have a Texas team that's extremely hot, but also historically, Texas has been vulnerable to plenty of upsets in the tournament. And obviously, you've got a different group of individuals and a different coach at the helm. But A&M's another team that I saw this weekend that I think is pretty good, but I'm not confident enough to say that they can make a run between or after one or two games max.
Yeah, I think that Penn State-Texas game is going to be a heck of a game. When I look at Penn State and the job that Micah Shrewsbury's done, they just had a great run to the Big Ten tournament. And I think what that shows you is that's a guy who in a one-game tournament knows how to get things done. And I think with limited prep, I think Penn State is going to be, in my eyes, I think the best candidate to take down a 2 seed. Will they? I don't have it picked yet, but I think Penn State could really give them trouble. But I think Texas is talented enough and they're deep enough to get past it. And I think they're going to go to the Elite Eight. Iowa State really doesn't excite me that much. I watched a couple of their games this weekend. They get after it defensively, but I don't think they have the consistency on the offensive end to really, make a run here. And I think Xavier, I even think, Mississippi State or Pitt could give them an upset. So I think this is a region where the 1 and 2 seeds prevail. But I think you could see some drama within that, within the 6. I think the 6, 4, and 5 seeds all could go down.
Yeah, definitely. I guess on that same vein, it's a region where it's Houston's to lose, and obviously with the potential prospect of playing in Houston for the Final Four. I guess we got a couple minutes left. Let's move on to the Final Four. Do you have a confident Final Four pick and/or national championship? How do you see it shaking out after all the things that we've discussed?
Yeah, so when it's all said and done, my 4 teams right now are Alabama, Marquette, Houston, and UConn. And when I take a step back and look at past weekend and look at the past 2 weeks, I really think those are the best 4 teams in the country. I really do. I've been a big Houston fan. I thought they were the best team all year. If you watch them play, you'll quickly understand. They're so long, they're athletic, they've got great shooters around them. Sasser and Sheed are both tournament tested, really, really skilled guards. And I think UConn honestly plays very similarly. They've got some monsters in Sanogo and last name's Claygan. Donovan Claygan. He's like 7'2".
Yeah.
And they get after it defensively. They've got I think an NBA guard in Jordan Hawkins, and they've got plenty of other pieces inside contributors that I think are going to end up getting past that run. I've got Houston over UConn ultimately, just because I think they've got better guards, and at this stage, in the tournament, you just need better shot makers. And one thing I saw against UConn and Marquette is when push comes to shove, UConn really did struggle to score the ball in that second half of that game. And I think that's going to ultimately do them in against Houston. On the flip side of that, why I think Marquette is so good is because they have a great way of isolating your best players. They did that really well against UConn. They've done it really well all season long. I think another reason I like them a lot is Kolek, who's the Big East Player of the Year as their point guard, was he had 4 fouls for most of that Big East tournament game, what against UConn, and they have so many other guys who contribute. They've got a ton of bigs. I think that they're ultimately going to come out, and I think I'm still back and forth. I think there's a decent chance that they can take down Alabama on that reason I said. They do a great job of isolating on your best guys and just make people. And I think Houston is going to get the revenge on them, but I think Alabama and Houston, it kind of reminds me of Gonzaga and Baylor 2 years ago, where they were the 2 best teams going into the tournament. They ultimately ended up meeting up, and Alabama has the offensive efficiency of a team like Gonzaga, and Houston has the defensive efficiency as a team like Baylor. And Baylor won that one. I think Houston's going to get it done. Their home city this year.
Yeah.
What about you?
I think overall that Houston's the best team in the country, and if you had to have a strong enough conviction to pick a team to win it all, I think that the prospect of having a team outside the Power 5 win it all, I think Houston's going to have a really good opportunity to do so. But again, oddly enough, I have kind of the 4 teams. I messed around with possibly having Purdue, Duke, maybe Memphis in the Final 4, but I think Alabama's the best team in the region, Houston and theirs, and I think Gonzaga or UConn has a decent enough chance to make a Final 4 run. But in my opinion, the best 2 teams that I've seen, possibly 3 if you include Marquette, is Houston and Alabama, who I have in the championship game. And it's kind of a toss-up between the 2. But I mean, if we have the opportunity to have an Alabama-Houston championship game, those are the 2 best teams. Those are the 2 best teams that I've seen this entire season.
Well, it looks like we're loosely in agreement on the the Final 4 here. Well, we don't have much time here. Give me a seed give me a 5 or 6 seed or higher who you think could make the Final 4.
I mentioned Memphis. Let's see. I think they probably have the best opportunity to do so, considering how well they were playing in the conference tournament. If I had to pick, I would say Memphis, but there's a chance that they could lose in the first round too. Do you have what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm a big Memphis fan too. I actually think they could give, if they get past Purdue, I think they actually beat Duke as well. I would say I mentioned it at the top of the pod, but I think Creighton actually has a really good chance. My only issue is they've got a lot of tough teams in front of them. Baylor, Arizona, Alabama to make the Final 4 is going to be awfully tough. But I think they're a team that could really make a good run. And I think that they're a matchup nightmare for a lot of these teams. And I think they could keep up offensively with Alabama. And I think defensively, they've been really solid all year. They've played a ton of good teams, and I think they could really make a run. Outside of that, I will say, I know you're going to like this, but don't sleep on the TCU Frogs. I think they could. I think they could as well. Again, tough. The road to the tournament and the road to the Final 4, but they're a team who's got the guards to do it, and who's got a great coach and Jamie Dixon as well.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to wrap up. But this was fun.